The tendency in human psychology is to remember the worst possible thing that happened in a relationship. In a marriage, the memory of unfaithfulness is escalated and repeated while thousands upon thousands of days of faithfulness are moved into the background. My earliest childhood memory is of being repeatedly knocked over and chased in tall grass by the family dog. The next earliest childhood memory is of my mother screaming as she lights a match and reaches into the gas oven, and the gas explodes and singes her face, and she turns to me in terror and in rage. The reality is that we remember the worst things that happen to us in a given location and with a given person significantly more. John Gottman's studies suggest in the emphasis of 5 praises needed to balance out 1 criticism. It suggests that the brain is defaulting to prioritizing negativity by 5 to 1. That there's a 500% overemphasis of negative events, which we can find as we go to a party. So-and-so says we look very nice. So-and-so says nice to see you. So-and-so says thanks for bringing the delicious food. Another person compliments our shoes. Another person warmly smiles and shakes our hand. Another person says so good to see you. And then one person doesn't even say anything particularly upsetting. They just look away. They kind of sneer and look away. Or they turn away rather than shake our hand. Instantly, the reptilian brain, the fight, flight, freeze tendency, wants to know why. Number 1. Number 2 comes into dominant focus. All those 5 compliments and praises out the window. Let's zero in on the worst thing that has happened, and then let's imagine the worst possible reason that it could have happened, and let's extrapolate that into the future and imagine the worst case scenario that could be coming our way based on the worst interpretation about the worst event that is on our radar, such that we are now fixated at a minimum of 5 to 1 ratio on the worst version of the worst thing that hasn't even happened yet. So we know that's a reality. We know that this is the default mode of the brain. What's harder to say is why. What's harder to say is why. And so what usually happens in a theory is that we tell a story. The story of gravity, the story of time, the story of cause and effect. We tell a story. And the story is useful if it allows us to predict the future more accurately than no story or the old story. No story is perfect, by the way. There is no scientific formula, and that's what a story is, a series of formulas. There is no scientific formula that will allow us to perfectly predict the weather, perfectly predict our lover's behavior, perfectly predict what will and will not make us happy, perfectly predict what leader to vote for to bring well-being to the country. There is no perfect formula to predict the best possible future. So what we look for is a story, is a formula, is a theory that more often than not, statistically speaking, takes us closer to a better future. So that's what we're going to look at here. And the first place I want to look is to the analogy of a boat. Now, you're out boat shopping because you're going to sail across the Atlantic. And you've heard it can get a little rough out there. And you want a boat that doesn't sink. Now, you look at different boats and you take tours of boats. And one boat seems a little dicey, but it's a good price. And it's not sinking today. Now, admittedly, it's a sunny day. It's in a protected area. It's not exposed to the waves. But, you realize it's just kind of barely hanging on there. You realize that this is a boat that does great in lakes or inside protected areas in good weather. It's a good weather boat. Do you want to get a discount on that boat to sail across the Atlantic? Or are you going to look for a boat that can weather the worst hurricane that could come up from time to time in the Atlantic? In other words, do you want to set out in a boat that is terrific as long as everything goes perfectly? Or do you want to set out in a boat that is terrific in good weather, but will stay afloat in the worst possible storms that anyone has encountered in the last 100 years? Now, when an engineer designs a home in an area prone to earthquakes, it's common to design to the 100-year earthquake. Now, again, the question is, why not design for today? It's not raining, it's not winding. You'd save a lot of money. But how will it be if in the next big rain your house slides down the hill? How will it be in the next small earthquake if it topples over and you die in your own house? So what we're getting at is that there is a hierarchy of needs. And so one of the things that Abraham Maslow illustrated is that every animal, including the human animal, including the reptilian brain, has a primary need to survive and a secondary need to be secure in that survival, and a third need to have a sense of love and belonging, which in turn cements one's security of survival. Because in a social ecosphere where we are interdependent, legally, financially, technically, in so many ways, meaning every single part of our lives are dependent on millions of people's cooperation. If one neighbor doesn't like us and decides to bomb the house, it's over. If all the neighbors decide to burn the neighborhood down, it's over. if the road crew that's fixing the highway to get to our house decides, we don't really feel like fixing the highway, let's just leave the roadblocks up and go home. Or let's make a stream instead of a highway. Let's use our excavators rather than to repave to carve up the highway and let a river flow through. You see, we depend on other people, and so love and belonging cements survival and security of survival, because it means that we're working together to survive rather than to destroy our lives. So in that hierarchy of survival, what you need to know are the extremes. For example, let's say you live in New York State. That's where I grew up. And so in the summer, in July, high 80s, beautiful swimming weather, not a cloud in the sky, no cold temperatures. You see, but in July, when you're having all that sunny weather, you need to know that in the cycle of the seasons, that what's coming in January is 3 feet of snow, is below zero temperatures. Now, the reason you need to know that that's coming is because you don't need to prepare to survive in July. But if you don't have winter coats, if you don't have enough wood bucked and ready to burn, if you don't have a roof capable of withstanding and not collapsing under 3 feet of snow, you die. Because you don't get very far in 3 feet of snow. If you have to crawl out under a collapsed roof in the wilderness, and unlike the movies and the focus on New York City, most of New York State is wilderness. I think it was a good mile for our closest neighbor growing up. So if the roof collapses in January in a blizzard, you can't get a lot done in 3 feet of snow. The phone lines may or may not be down. Even if they're up, doesn't mean that people are standing by with helicopters ready to help. So you have to prepare when you've got leverage, when you've got time, when you're not under 3 feet of snow. You have to buy the boat for the hurricane in the sunny weather, when you've got choice. Because when you're going through the eye of the needle, when you're going through the worst possible extreme in that cycle of probability, you can barely survive if you've done everything right. If you buy the best possible boat, the best radios, the best weather projection, hire the best crew, and you're sailing across the Atlantic, if a hurricane hits and you do everything right, you will likely come out alive on the other side. If you bought a nice barge for parties, if you hired the people with nice smiles rather than who knew how to sail, or the people who were cheapest rather than the people who knew what they were doing, you go under. Because in that extreme 100-year earthquake, in the 3 feet of snow in a blizzard at 10 degrees below zero, you don't have the time to survive and learn how to survive simultaneously. You've got to do things right. And to do that, you need to be prepared. You need to invest when you didn't need to. And how are you going to do that if you have a positive-oriented mind? If you have a mind that looks for the positive, maybe the winters won't come this year. Maybe God will give her blessing, and there will be no 3 feet of snow, so we can go on sunbathing in July. Maybe we don't need to save up $100,000 for a hurricane-worthy boat. Maybe there'll be no hurricanes. Think positive. Look at the bright side. And set out to sail in a dinghy. It's only a few $100. It could work out. Think positive, row hard, and you could cross the Atlantic. See, if we thought positively in these cyclical extremes, then our primary need to survive would be capsized, would be sabotaged by positivity, by unstructured optimism. It all could work out nicely. The universe is my friend. Let's not work too hard. Let's not spend too much money. Let's not discipline ourselves. Let's go back to sunbathing. Let's have another ice cream. Let's spend and rack up credit card debt rather than prepare for economic downturn. Because I have a good feeling about it. It could all work out just fine. How many times in 100 years does the 100-year earthquake come? It's probably not coming next year. It's probably not coming the next year after that. And just maybe, a little help from global warming, we don't need to prepare any wood for next winter's fire. Now, in the hierarchy of human needs, we're driven to survive. To survive means preparing for the worst possible scenario. But who wants to think about the worst possible scenario? It's not a default choice most of us enjoy doing, because it isn't fun to say, you know what, it's probably not going to happen, but what will we do if next year is the 100-year earthquake? Do we have enough water? Oh, I don't want to carry water. Do we have enough food? I don't want to buy some of that horrible tasting food and store it in cupboards. Do we have enough gasoline for the generator? I don't want to have to spend money on a generator we're never using. I don't want to think about that. I don't want to work harder for something that I can put out of mind. And yet the drive to survive dictates that we not think about whether we are capable of surviving in shallow water without any waves on a sunny day. It demands that we think about the worst case scenario, which is the hurricane. And what if one of the engines went out and then the hurricane came? What if the mast broke? What if this happened? What if that happened? What if the bilge pump gave out right at the time when the swells were washing out and it was most needed, because it was a cheap bilge pump, and what wears it out is use. Obviously, it's not going to stop working when it's not even turned on, and it's not going to turn on if there isn't water flooding into the bilge. So we have to discipline ourselves in order to survive to the worst case scenario. And so you could call the reptilian brain an unwelcome friendly reminder of what could happen again based on past traumas. Now, if you are a new organism, a new infant born into the world, how do you measure what you need to prepare for? What is the threshold that says if I can succeed and prepare for this, I've done my job to survive? What's that threshold? Well, I would suggest that one logical threshold is the worst memories, the worst moments of your entire life. Because if Dad is nice on a Monday, and Dad is nice on a Tuesday, and Dad is nice on a Wednesday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday again, he's quite nice. He's in fact quite nice for the entire year and a little bit of the year after that. But then a tsunami of cascading events hits Dad broadside. Mom's in the hospital. Well, because Mom's in the hospital and he doesn't want to abandon her, he takes time off work. Which means that the next week, the biggest bill that the family has ever seen hits the family broadside at the very moment that the income has collapsed. Well, that's a big deal. And the kids do not have a mother. At the very time they need a mother because they have a distraught father and a sick mother. So the kids are now at their worst while Dad's at his worst and while Mom's at her worst. And this is the point that the bill collectors, sensing blood, say these people may not be able to pay their bills. We all know the scandal of American medical system, billing. She's been in the hospital a week, that's a good $100,000. So, at this point when empathy is most needed, the bill collectors, what, shorten the loan? Send a pay due notice? Add in late payments to an already collapsing family economy. And you don't understand any of this as a 6-year-old. And so you are trying to get what you've gotten before out of parents who are incapable of giving it in a culture that does not dissipate this tsunami on the family, in a culture of isolated individuals. So where wave after wave after wave of energy is hitting Dad. And then you add a little bit to that wave. Come on, Dad. You said we'd go to the park on Monday. And that's when Dad snaps. And he backhands you across the cheek and says, "Get the fuck out. Can't you see I'm busy? Get the fuck out." Well, the child has never experienced that force, emotionally, physically, mentally. It's a new set point in pain. It's a new set point in shock. It's a new set point in insecurity. Now, if the child is 6 years old and is intelligent, whether that intelligent is intuitive, biological, instinctive, or rational, an intelligent person has to say, if I've experienced this amount of pain, shock, trauma, abandonment, confusion, hurt, physical symptoms, mental symptoms, emotional symptoms in 6 years, the logical conclusion would be that this family is, as it is, vulnerable to this happening again. Like, what is more logical than that conclusion? Because the very things, culturally, financially, logistically, and otherwise, the very things that led up to this violent backlash of a giant towards a small child are predisposed to happen in the environment in which they happen. That's why they happen. They are probable. In this case, they're actual. But when something actually happens, it is probable that it will happen again. Meaning, you have to be pretty moronic to say, I sailed across the Atlantic, and on day 3, 180 mile per hour winds hit my boat broadside, and I had less than an hour to prepare as the winds escalated. Now, if you survive that particular encounter with wind, and the weather clears up, you have to be pretty moronic to say, that will never happen again. It's moronic because it just did happen. And if you had an hour to prepare before, it might be intelligent to say, it could happen at any time again, and I will probably have an hour to prepare, but maybe it'll only be half an hour. Because if the next storm comes up in half an hour, then you could say, well, it could happen in half an hour. In other words, it is irrational to take something that has happened and pretend that it won't happen again. So it is irrational to prepare for anything less than the worst thing that you have experienced. Any sailor that has experienced 150 mile an hour winds and goes out on the next voyage in the same ocean and says, I'm only going to prepare for 75 mile an hour winds, and if more than 75 mile an hour winds come along, my ship's going down, is a complete moron. They are a danger to your boat. Get them off there. If they are anything close to intelligent, they will prepare for 175 miles an hour winds, because they'll say, look, I'm only 50 years old. Storms and weather, including freak storms and weather, have been happening for millions of years. Do you think there's never that I've experienced the peak weather of the entire planet? Forget it. So if I, in 50 years, have experienced 150 mile per hour winds on this ocean, I should prepare for at least 175, because it could happen. It's probable. If I'm lucky, it'll happen when I'm docked, or every 20 years or whatever, but it's probable it will happen again. So what does trauma do? It causes us to go into these loops where we remember and remember and remember the worst thing that ever happened to us. That's what we tend to remember. Put it together. Now, what's the benefit of this? Well, one of the things that we do when we are remembering our wife's unfaithfulness, our best friend's sudden betrayal, our teacher who graded us because we wouldn't perform sexual favors, the government that just demanded to be paid taxes even when we had high medical bills. They're not interested in me. This is criminal. We prepare through remembering for the worst possible event in our lives that is likely to happen again because it happened in our lifetime. And I would suggest that one of the constructive reasons that we remember the most terrifying events is that our brain wants us to develop a solution. Now, when you're 6 years old and you get whacked across the floor by someone who could kill you if they want to, and you see the rage and the dysregulated energy in their eyes, you've got to come up with a strategy. Because if you keep doing what led to that violence, if you keep associating with someone in this amount of pain, you could die. And you need a response to that possibility. So this is one reason that a healthy brain would dwell on the negative until the negativity is answered. Meaning, until I have answered the terror, answered the question, answered the trauma and the equation with a pattern of energy that says, I will survive the next beating of the bully because now I know karate, now I have bigger muscles, now I carry a firearm, right? I will survive the next $200,000 medical bill because I have insurance, because I have this. I will survive the next raid of my civil liberties by my police or whatever it is. I have an answer. I will survive the next hurricane. I have upgraded my boat. I've gotten a better boat. I've trained myself to sail better. I have put up a cord of wood in July for January in New York. And so I will survive until I've taken action that answers that crisis at the depth and at the magnitude at which the crisis will likely present itself again. My brain will relive it, will relive it, will relive it until I have an answer. Until I have an answer that says, it's not going to happen the next time the same way. I have prepared. I am now safe. And when you understand that the first of our human needs is the need to survive, that's the first in the hierarchy of human needs, then this is intelligent. It is not fun having PTSD. It is not fun having recurring nightmares. It is not fun being given problems again and again that we cannot solve. But if we do not collapse under the terror, the shock, the grief, and the pain of remembering the worst possible events in our lives, we will in time develop solution and be motivated by the extraordinary pain and fear of that pain that memory represents. Meaning, when we're in July, we will have a flashback that takes us back to almost freezing to death last December. And we will say, you know what, that could happen again. Let's get off our butt and cut some wood and build a stronger roof. Let's get some kindling. Let's make sure there are 6 books of matches. Let's wrap the matches in plastic. Let's have a backup plan. Because I don't want to feel that way again. The memory motivates survival and motivates action to make that survival more secure. If we understand that our first drive and need is to survive, we can understand why a child will look at their parents not on the calm and sunny days, but look at the parent and focus on the worst case scenario of that parent. I mean, why is it that a spouse who you've been faithful to for 9,000 days, day after day after day after day, you wanted to have sex with this person, but you had an agreement and you declined. You wanted to have sex with that person, you had an agreement and you declined. Day after day after day, year after year after year of choosing to be faithful. And then there's this one night. Your wife's been a little bit cold and blaming of late. She's gone to visit her sister without consulting you on the emotional and physical impact of doing so. You find someone you're particularly attracted to at a time you are particularly lonely and particularly irritated and feel particularly helpless and small, a feeling for which you want revenge, and someone is particularly flirtatious at that moment, and you decide to have sex with that person, and later you come clean to your wife. Now, you've got 10,000 days of faithfulness, and you've got one day of breaking your agreement to either what? Just decline all sex or have a divorce first, or what is it? Whatever the agreement is, you've broken that agreement. And you haven't stopped loving your wife. It may have even reminded you of how in love you were, or whatever it was. You haven't stopped loving your wife. She was not available to be sexually attended to at the time. Why is it that you are now defined in your wife's mind as a cheater? Doesn't hold up statistically. We're talking about one day in 10,000. So if you're going to label something, for example, is this gold or is it zinc? Well, if you're trying to be scientifically accurate, and it's 99.9% gold and 0.1% zinc, do you call it zinc? Of course not. You call it what the vast majority of it is. Everything has impurity in it. This is top-notch silver. It still has impurity. But silver's the best name we've got for it, because it's 99.9% pure silver. This is 99.9% pure gold. You are 99.99% faithful, but not for 3 hours. In over 100,000 hours, you cross the line for 3 of them. Why does your wife look at you with new eyes? Not 0.001% new eyes. But why does she reframe you into a cheater, into a threat, into a betrayer? Well, it's simple. These things hurt. Doubt hurts. Betrayal hurts. Lies hurt. Imagination, maybe he likes her better than me, hurts. These things hurt. They hurt her. They hurt her more because the brain focuses on the negative than many of those positive days. Meaning, for most of those positive days, she didn't come home celebrating. Honey, you were faithful again today. I'm so lucky. Wow, this is great. I have a faithful man again and again. She wasn't celebrating all of this tremendous loyalty, this tremendous integrity. She wasn't to the moon about it. Wow, you did it again today. I mean, just look at that woman over there. And you put me ahead of curiosity, of adrenaline, of a sense of increased social rank, because our cult will rank you more the more desirable you are to the opposite sex. So you put your word to me against all that. Again, amazing, incredible. Wow, you must really love me. See, because that's positive, and the brain isn't focused on the positive. It's worried about the biggest threat in the room. Wow, that driver. Did you see that driver? She's not focusing on your faithfulness. She's focusing on the threat that's in her life. A reckless driver S-ing through traffic on 101. A person who gave her the finger at school. An employee that's threatened to rat that she borrows the boss's paper clips. The brain is focused on the negatives because the positives can be ignored. So suddenly you're the negative one. You're the biggest thing. What will the neighbors think? What if this happened? What if that? What if I got AIDS? Because you're now a cheater. Well, I mean, it's not scientific to say because you've cheated once in 10,000 days that you are defined by the only anomalous 3 hours in 10,000 days. But that's still how she feels and thinks because her brain recognizes a truth. If you cheated once, then whether it's every 10,000 days or every 15,000 days or whatever it is, you could cheat again. And then the brain makes the worst possible scenario of what the cheating could mean. Maybe I'll be humiliated. Maybe I won't be able to retire. Maybe you'll leave me when I'm have diabetes when I'm 70. Whatever it is, the brain will come up with the worst possible scenario to extrapolate out of the facts. And then it will ask the question, do you have a plan for this? But it's asking a psychologically illiterate person in a reactive state. So the obvious answer is no, I don't have a plan. Other than what? To get away from this person, to turn them into an enemy. I need to get away from the person who brought up these feelings. I need to get away. You're the bad guy that's making me feel terrible. I can't forget it. My brain is asking me, do you have a plan for the next time this comes around? And we are emotionally and psychologically and relationally illiterate. So even if we have a plan, it's not a very good one. We don't have a roadmap to solve a marriage 99% successfully in a situation like this. We have poor advice from this person who can't hold down a great relationship. We have another bunch of opposing poor advice from this person who's never been married once in their life, but they have very clear ideas of how to handle it. It's intelligent for the brain to focus on the negative until it can survive that negative in its worst possible expression, even though it doesn't happen very often, and even though the worst possible expression of that will almost certainly never happen 99.999% of the time. The brain is still associating this with core survival. It's moved on from trying to survive as a physical body with physical threats to surviving as a social body with social threats, as a financial body with financial threats, as a sexual body with sexual threats, none of which affect survival directly to the extent that they did a million years ago, when these things really were, you saw a 400-foot lion or a 400-pound lion that ran 40 miles an hour. You saw that. He was after blood. Now, you don't forget that, because you don't live another day if you say, oh, he's probably going to go west tomorrow. No, if that lion comes at you again, you need a plan. You need a spear, you need a rock, you need to be up in a tree. You need a plan, you need to have your eyes open, or you don't get to make it through another day to be positive. But so many of these things that we're talking about today are not direct threats to physical existence, but they feel like they are. And this is where the hijacking of the reptilian brain that served us a few 100,000 years ago is now destroying the accounting system that would otherwise lead to many more relationships being viewed as positive. Because if you're a business owner and you said that this client pays their bills profitably and in full 10,000 or 9,999 times out of 10,000, that once for 3 hours, you're a restaurant owner and you've got a customer who comes in and spends $100 on a nice bottle of wine with high profits every single night for 10,000 days, and then one day they left their wallet at home, you are a complete moron if you chase that customer out of your restaurant and say, I never want to see you again. You're a delinquent. You don't pay your bills. You're a loser. You're a cheat. Get the hell out of my restaurant. How dare you come in and not have your wallet? No, you've made $5,000 net profit on that, and you've just lost $100. If you're an accountant and you're rational, you do not get rid of that customer. But we get rid of friends and lovers and parents using that, look what you did with this one time. Look what you did when you were this and this and this. And it is true that it is likely to happen again at the statistical rate that it happened before. But it is not justified purely on an accounting level to get rid of a customer that makes you $5,000 and then loses you $100, makes you $5,000 and then loses you $100. If you could scale that to have 1 million customers make you $5,000 and lose you $100, make you $5,000, you would be incredibly rich and incredibly lucky in customers. If you can find someone who tells you the truth 99.99% of the time, you will learn a lot of truth for every lie. It's just not how your brain will work. So if you're a parent and are wondering why your kid didn't remember the C slide, didn't remember turning up the favorite music, why do they remember the slap? Why do they look at you with distrust and terror? Because the child's brain has got to prepare for the worst possible event and how to survive it. And you're a giant and they're a child. A partner who is not an adult, of which there are many. A partner who is living as a child, needing the world to protect them from their own fears, is too frightened of seeing anything wrong. They can't face the reality, so they will run away from the truth and they will court people who lie to them. because they're not ready to grow up. They're not ready to see the truth. You're way better off, by the way, if you have a partner that says, I'm good at doing this 98% of the time, and then I snap 2% of the time. I'm going to say some cruel things when I snap. I'll go on a bender for 3 days, and then I'll be back. That's just what I do 2 days out of 100. And I'm 98% faithful if I look back at all my relationships, but every 2 days out of 100, I get too drunk or do this. And I'm a bit of a threat there. I'm a STD risk after those 2 days. So what we should do is get me tested after I sober up and do this and this and this. And I will do what I say when I remember, but I do lose track of what I say about 5% of the time, maybe 3%. And I'm also defensive about it because I judge myself for that. So you have to actually be tactful with me when I've lied to you and let you down, which is hard to do. So we're probably going to fight about that. I don't know, once every 30 days. Those fights, if at their best, can be as little as 20, 30 minutes. Or you can be like this ex and draw it out for the whole month, where the whole month is seething power struggles about that one 10-minute incident that will happen, because I'm not very mature in that area and I haven't figured out how to change it. If you can deal with an adult, they will welcome this honesty because it's real. Nothing's perfect. No parent, no government, no school, no religion, no religious leader. No one is perfect. So what you're looking for is something that's better than the alternatives by a decent margin. That's what an adult can expect and look at. But if you do not have an adult inside you, you are terrified of being responsible for anything. If you are terrified of being responsible for anything and you don't think you can keep yourself alive, you've got to search for perfection. If you're searching for perfection, you're not going to find it, but you will latch on to people who lie to you. And when you do, you will ultimately get betrayed, because you will discover the imperfection that they are hiding from you because you are too immature to be willing to choose someone who is imperfect. I was on a date once where a woman was incredibly sexually flirtatious. It's a first date, projecting all kinds of wonderful, bubbly things upon me. And I asked her why she'd left her last boyfriend. And she said, unlike you, he was so controlling and this and that, the other, And she described a trait that I recognized in myself. And I realized that she knew nothing about me. She wasn't making any effort to know anything about me. She was projecting perfection onto me and contrasting that with a real imperfect human being who was her ex. So I burst the bubble. I said, you know what? My ex-girlfriend says that about me. You haven't picked a different person, and I am not perfect. Exactly what you've complained about your ex. If you talk with my ex, she'll probably tell you the exact same thing. So congratulations, you're good at picking men with this trait, and you're good at projecting and not seeing them, and then you're good at abandoning and punishing them for betraying the outraged inner child when I'm not the perfect dad. So this is wonderful. I now know your pattern, and you have a chance to know your pattern as well, because you want to get it on with me. You're sure that this is the next great thing. But let's just do it honestly. Let's be clear that you like men who are like this. But let's also be clear that you don't like to admit that you like men like this, so you pretend that they're not the way they are with no evidence other than a first date and no discussion about it. You haven't even asked me if I'm like that. You've told me that I'm not like that. So what am I inviting her to do? I said, so I'm willing to date you or have sex with you on condition that we get real, that you're picking me probably because instinctively you know I'm like your ex, and you know your ex is like your father, or whatever it is that you're rehashing as a childhood betrayal. So let's get clear that I'm here because you've got unresolved issues and you're not an adult yet. Now, if we can go into this relationship understanding that and knowing that that's why you've picked me, and knowing that I've got work to deal with you as well, of being blamed and put up in pedestals and then knocked down and all that, we've got a good deal. Because we're both going to get to deal with our stuff. And you've done a good job. You've picked someone just like your ex. Good job. So how about it? Well, she went white. She wasn't interested anymore. She would have come home if I'd played along like that. She couldn't wait to get undressed. As long as she could be a baby, as long as she could be a little girl. You would never hurt me, Daddy, right? You'd never do any of those things that scare my little girl, right? You'd fit in and live up to all my unspoken expectations and carefully written contracts of what a good man is supposed to be. I won't even tell you what they are, but you'll live up to them, right? And I will be furious. And I can't wait to abandon and punish you if you don't. But you're not going to do that, right? Now let's have sex, right? So she couldn't be an adult. Now, it's easy for her to find another person who will recognize that she wants to be a child and value having sex with her more than being honest with her. She wants it. So if she wants sex more than honesty, and he does, they'll get on just fine until she runs through the betrayal again. Oh, you weren't a perfect man? Oh, my goodness. Oh, I've been duped. Oh, why does this happen to me? Oh, I'm going to need time to recover. Oh, my goodness. Oh. Of course, I'm not interested in your feelings. I'm not taking responsibility for the game. I may not even know, and I certainly don't want to, that I'm playing that game. But I'll find another man who says, oh, you poor little girl. Those rotten men. I'm not like that. I'm not like that. I'll treat you right. Come have sex with me. Okay, Daddy. Just as long as you're psychic and know all my secret wishes, and all my little caveats, and that I'll leave you and be completely irresponsible for my impact as soon as you break one of the unwritten laws that I've got in my long list of what perfect dads look like. And then don't expect me to keep any of my agreements with you at that point, because I've been betrayed. So, if you're willing to be an adult is the question. And that's really the only answer to trauma. There is a reality that we will die. There is a reality that there are unfair things that happen. There's a reality that there's hypocrisy. There's a reality that there's corruption. There's a reality that there's rape, that there's violent crime. There's a reality that there are incredibly deceitful and damaging lies going around. These are realities. And the question for the adult is not, are any of these perfect? I don't want to vote. None of these leaders are perfect. I hate this guy for this reason and that guy for that. It's always guys in America. I hate da-da-da. They're not perfect. I want a perfect one. I don't want to vote for any of them. They're rotten. This one lied once. Get him out of there. So the adult is looking for an incremental step forward that is superior to the step before and is willing to be responsible, able and willing to respond, to see that progress is made in that direction. That is an adult. An adult takes responsibility for being a participant in their reality. And an adult, over time with responsibility, can answer the traumatic memory so that when the memory says, yes, this could happen again, that happens again, and can bring love in. An adult is capable of love, self-love that ripples out. An adult is capable of love and attention to make things better, to reduce the suffering and increase the well-being based on the status quo. The status quo isn't perfect. The status quo before that wasn't perfect. And the new status quo, if successfully implemented, will not be perfect either. Sitting in the corner is a GE profile fridge that is so noisy and irritating with these variable noises that grab attention, like what's it doing now? That it has a whole section in the manual about what all these noises mean. If you notice your fridge is groaning horribly, that's perfectly normal. It should be groaning horribly. It's groaning horribly because we designed it that way. When it groans like this, it's doing this. When it groans like that, it's doing this. So now that you know that you should have a groaning horribly fridge, please enjoy your $2,000 GE profile that ruins the soundscape more than any $300 fridge before. Okay, get rid of that fridge. Well, I didn't want to have to pay for that. I'm a little boy. Where's mom and dad going to pay for my new fridge? Will the landlord pay for the fridge? The landlord doesn't want to pay for the fridge. So I have to research. And then the outrage. It's not a perfect world. No one lists the decibel ratings of different fridges. Don't they understand? Can no one put a sound meter up to their fridge? Goodness gracious. Nonetheless, LG has an excellent reputation for a digital inverter and a very quiet fridge. So I buy one. It's very quiet. I still hear it, but at least it's not groaning and moaning. A week later, 2 a.m, it starts groaning. What's it doing now? Have I been betrayed? Have I spent $1,500 getting the quietest fridge that I could find only to be set up by, what, another groaning and moaning fridge? What's it doing? What do we do now? Well, we have to get a repair person out. I discovered that if I just turn the power off and turn it back on again, it takes a week for it to start groaning and moaning. So if I just turn the power on and off every week, I've got a quiet fridge. It's not perfect. I spent $1,500 for one imperfect groaning and moaning fridge. to another, much nicer, bigger, better layout, ice crusher, better water dispenser. Everything about it is better. It's bigger, it's wonderful, but I have to unplug it and plug it in every week, or listen to groaning and moaning. There are no perfect systems. There are no perfect human beings. There are no perfect systems. There are no perfect thoughts. There are no perfect countries, no perfect cultures, no perfect governments, no perfect companies. And it is an adult that, number one, evaluates the options and picks the best one for you, is willing to pay the price to make it happen, understands the limitations and the imperfections, and is grateful for a step forward, and loves and benefits the ecologies of which they're a part. That's what an adult does, and the adult is the only one capable of healing trauma. The adult is the only one capable of healing PTSD. The adult is the only one capable of going over that hurdle to a better set point, to a better reality with a better probability field on the other side. The adult is the one that is able and willing to respond with love for the inner child, for the inner adolescent, for the young adult inside, for the present moment, for the future, and having done all of that for oneself, then for other people, then for the planet, such that the system gets a little better. The life gets a little better. That the system of thinking, of spending money, spending time, making videos, speaking, gets a little bit better. That's all that we can ask for, whether that's 10 times better in an ideal kind of super optimized step of leap forward and 10x thinking, or 20% better, 50% better. It's never perfect. But in the meanwhile, it's important to understand why, and that our brains, our reptilian brain, will take everyone and everything and every place in our memory and in our reality and highlight the worst possible things that have ever occurred or could occur in those domains and ruminate on those until we have an answer, until we realize that we can survive even that. Because the little boy and the little child without an adult present can't survive any of it. Every betrayal is life-threatening. It's a huge deal to discover as a 6-year-old that your partner betrayed you, because they were going to take care of you forever. What if they leave you and you're all alone, 6 years old? And they're never going to pay your medical bills. Oh, my goodness. My goodness. They're not going to be there for you. 6-year-old that needs a parent, and you're not that parent because you've never grown up. The adult is the only one capable of transcending the trauma and betrayal of childhood.